What's going on, y'all? It's your host, Will, coming back for a new episode, Field Note Fridays, powered by Yamaha. On today's episode, this is part 3 of our November RUT series with Lakosky. We've talked pre-RUT, we've talked peak RUT, and now we're going to be talking about what some of y'all might refer to as that second RUT. Some people call it the waning RUT, but it is just kind of that weird time of November that, you know, your bucks might have already been locked down on does once or twice or just once, and they're kind of in that weird in-between time that, you know, they're not quite sure what they're doing. They might be finishing up the rut, but, you know, it just depends on where you are in the country. Some of y'all might just be now getting into the pre or peak rut. You know, it just depends on where you are. And then a lot of y'all, your rut is starting to wind down. So we're going to refer to kind of that waning, wind down rut before, you know, just before we get into the post rut. These deer are really heavily focused on food. And so we're going to get Lee on here to pick his brain, hopefully get some nuggets for y'all so y'all can apply it to what you're doing over the next week or two and go bag yourself a big buck. And again, y'all, we just want to thank you for tuning in to the HuntStand podcast. We really appreciate your support. And if you haven't yet, make sure you have the HuntStand app downloaded. Upgrade to Pro Whitetail today. You'll thank yourselves later. I'm going to quit rambling, and here's our man, Lee. Well, man, you ready to get this thing started?
You bet.
All right. Well, Lee, man, welcome back. We got you on here for this third part of this RUT series that we're doing with you. So welcome back to the podcast, man.
Well, great to be here. Great to be here, Will.
Well, man, definitely glad to have you back and talk deer hunting as always. You know, down here in Texas, and I'm sure up in your area, we finally had that cold front that moved in last week across most of the nation. We're finally seeing some of those late fall, early winter conditions here in Texas. So, I mean, how have things been for you up there?
Same. Has been great. It's been awesome. I mean, you knew it was going to be just with the moon phase and stuff at the early part of the rut. And then, you know, the cold weather sets in. I mean, we got a little bit of lockdown and stuff here, but still, you know, you have the right food sources and stuff. And even just the last couple of days here in Illinois, you know, we've shot a couple, and even though they're locked down, you're not seeing them the way we were even just a week and a half ago or a week ago.
Yeah.
There, as long as you have food source, when you get that cold weather, we have the does coming out still, and you know, the bucks following behind them. So that's kind of, you know, it's a big bonus when you get that cold front, you know, during November this time of year. So, I mean, it's been a phenomenal rut so far.
Heck yeah, man. Well, tell us about, you just put an arrow through one not too long ago. Tell us the details.
Well, we got down here to Illinois for my first time, and I've been down here, you know, of course, all summer planting and fertilizing and spraying and doing all that kind of stuff and getting food plots in. But I hadn't been back, you know, since I got, you know, my buddy Josh, who lives down here and works for us, and, you know, keeps up with this farm down here. So he sent me pictures and stuff. So he knew the food plots looked good. So it was awesome. Like, came a week and a half ago down, and basically just to get stands up. And so we just came down quick for just a couple days just to move stands. You know, We're still learning it. This is only like the 4th year that we've had this farm here. So you're always learning stuff and putting more stands up. It's just depending on what the cameras are telling you and all that kind of stuff. So came down last week and just for 2 days, and, you know, we just kind of, I didn't even hunt. It was so warm. You know, we had that warm spell there too. Mm-hmm. And so it really is beneficial sometimes, you know, when you come to something like this, you're so excited to get into a stand, but a lot of times it's more beneficial to go drive around something with a spotting scope and look at some of your fields, and then you can cover several different fields, and, you know, you can cover a lot more area and spot, you know, maybe a buck that you'd like to go after. And that's exactly what happened. It's in the same spot I had a food plot last year, and we videoed this buck last year. He had a really big side, big mass, but he had one screwed up side. It was like a big spike that came out and some points off of it. And we figured he was like 4 or 5. But he had the jacked up side, and you just don't know. And he wasn't limping at all. So a lot of times you're like, if he's not limping, maybe he'll just damaged it in velvet, or, you know, broke off crazy the year before, took a chunk of his skull or something. Yeah. So you're just like, hey, let's just leave him. Maybe he'll come back normal this year. And he did. I could tell right away it was that buck. He's got such a unique face on him, big black nose, and, you know, different than any other deer looks. I said, oh man, he put his other side back up, you know, like we were expecting. And so there's a couple of big ones, him and a big 8-point, that I was like, man, I'd shoot either one of those. So, you know, we spotted him a couple weeks ago. So when he came back, we had we put a couple stands up a week ago when we were here. And then when I got back, I sat there one night and it was like, okay, the stand needs to be moved a little bit. And so we just popped another one up, and basically it was more for wind than positioning of where the deer were coming.
Yeah.
And first time in it, I didn't think I think I was out of the money because I had to sit the one for the wind, but they were all over right by the other stand. And they were out chasing does like crazy. I mean, it was just like a light switch. Like that last week, all the big bucks were out, older deer, checking does, and just out feeding and kind of just checking them out a little bit.
Yeah.
And when I got down here, it was the same way. And then basically the night I shot mine, the next day we had snow and cold and have a big weather change.
Oh.
And it on that weather change, it just bang, the rut was on, and bang, they were into lockdown like immediately. So it was like a night and day difference from just the day that I shot that one. I have a couple of buddies of mine down here too. And all of a sudden, bang, the big ones were locked out. And of course, you're still seeing them here and there if you're on the right spot with the right doe. But, so yeah, but finally that buck was out chasing does around, and I just didn't think I was going to get a shot at him because he was like right on him. You could grunt at him and stuff and they would look, but he was just too interested in the does. But then later, he kind of ran some does around this point, and then later he came out and he was just by himself, and it just worked out perfectly because where we were, there's a big hump in the field, and he was kind of down in the dip, and so I could still see him. I could just see like his head and his horns over that dip, but I knew I just turned my back to him and grunt loud. But it was pretty windy, so I had to grunt super loud to get him to look. But for him, he couldn't see over that dip, or over the hill. So I just knew it'd be perfect because he can't see where it's coming from. He's going to come and look. And so as soon as he looked and started licking his nose, I was like, okay, we got him. He just came like on a rope right to us.
Heck yeah.
So yeah, it worked out great. We just hit it before they started, does started coming in. I think a lot of it was that snow and weather change that really flipped the switch on him. But even when, it doesn't matter what point of the rut, they're still out there. So you're always going to have some good hunts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even when they're locked down.
Absolutely. Yeah, last week I was out with my brother and I was filming him, and we had this tall tine 9-point that had come in. He was on lockdown with the doe, and brother got an opportunity. And unfortunately, I think he misranged him or something happened, and he shot right over the back.
Yeah. My buck, it was funny because he coming right in at me, and I just like, I'm not, down in Southern Illinois, the bodies aren't as big as they are up in Iowa.
Right.
And they just like, and that, and they're a little different deer, so when he came in, I was like, boy, is he 4 or is he 5? And he just comes right in out on the field edge. And my stands in the timber, probably, 10 yards, and he's standing right at 20 yards broadside. And I was like, still trying to figure out, is he old enough? Am I sure on this? I always want to make sure that, we give him, enough years.
Right.
That's the most important thing. And he's huge. I mean, he had over 7-inch bases on him and stuff. And then he started walking in the woods behind us. And I was like, oh, now he's going to start getting downwind. I still questioning it. And then I don't know why, I just kind of slipped my mind. I was like, wait, we saw him last year. I thought he was 4 or 5 last year even. When he had that jacked up side, and I was like, oh, he's plenty old. And so he was getting behind me like at 37. You see, he was getting nervous. He was starting to maybe catch our wind a little bit, and shouting behind us at 37. But my buddy Clay and cameraman's like, man, we could have had him perfect right at 20 yards. I was like, well, I want to make sure that I feel 100% confident that's one that we should shoot. And then when you walk up to him, he's like, man, you're crazy for not shooting that when he was at 20.
Oh man.
But I just never want to make a mistake on him. And, because we're so, you want to get into 5 or 6 and even older, they're going to be get their best racks even, well after 5, if you can let them go that long. But, they're just body size, just judging them here is a little different than Iowa. So you just got to get used to it a little bit.
A little tricky.
Yeah.
So, man, so far, what we've talked in regard to the rut. We've kind of talked pre-rut. We've had an episode on the peak rut. And for this episode, I don't want to get into post-rut yet, but I kind of want to talk to those listeners out there that, this might help them gear up for that hunt, that their deer might still be rutting just a little bit, more or less on the backside of it. So I kind of want to pick your brain on how you strategically go after deer that, they've already been through 1 or 2 lockdowns, they've bred once or twice already, and, they may start to think otherwise off the rut, but if they have that one hot doe that comes by, it's kind of like a light bulb comes back on and all of a sudden, they're back into it. So how do you approach, I guess, what you might call, some guys call it the waning rut, the secondary rut. How do you kind of approach this phase of the hunt where we're on the backside?
Yeah, and we're coming up on that really, because we're like in lockdown right now, basically, this time of year. And when we start getting to the back end of November, start getting the back end of the rut, that could be, to me, it's just as good as the beginning part.
Right.
And especially this year, because you have to moon right. I mean, it was like the 10th through the 15th. So you knew if you got cold weather and stuff, it's going to be unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
But this year, for people, if you haven't, had any luck yet or anything else, and you're starting to think, man, the rut's almost is ending. I missed my best part of it. The moon is going to be perfect again right after Thanksgiving, the 25th through almost the end of the month. So, and that, to me, that is like perfect timing. That's why, like Tiffany right now, I almost even hated to text her when I killed that one there, because she couldn't come. Our kids both were sick. And, I had some buddies down here, and she's like, nah, I just can't come down there with Cameron and Reagan with colds and stuff and give it to everybody. So she stayed home and was hunting there. And she hasn't shot one yet. She's had so many encounters, and every time she goes up, she sees like a big one, but they're chasing does, and when it's like 40 yards getting ready to shoot, they turn and run after a doe. Mm-hmm. She just had like the worst luck. And so she was starting to get, like, gosh, now they're kind of getting locked down. We're not seeing them, and I haven't gotten one yet. So I almost felt bad, texting her and saying I got another one. That's like, oh boy, here she's gonna be like. But the thing is, I'm not worried about it one bit, because she has a couple of real good ones that she's hunting at home in Iowa. And when we start getting to right after Thanksgiving, I feel pretty confident she'll still catch one of these in between before that, even next week. But if you get to the week after, the moon is going to be perfect for that. You're going to see them on their feet during daylight right after Thanksgiving, and especially if the weather's cold like this. But normally our strategy, even if it's not, this year's exceptional because we had cold weather and good moon for early, the pre-rut and kind of getting towards the post-rut, portion of it. You're going to have perfect conditions for it. So you knew it was going to be good. But like for us, for a lot of people, maybe they don't have like food plots and stuff like a lot of us do, but a lot of people do. Let's face it, that food plot market, and everybody knows now, a lot of people have, planted food plots in their brassica fields and everything else. And like on the backside of the rut, those bucks are basically, you're hunting them just like you are in the pre-rut. You're just finding where are the does at, and they're going to be at your prime food source. So that's where you can see the bucks too. And that's like our best time. If you don't get them like early on, like in the peak part of the pre-rut portion, you're going to get them after it, even if they're locked down. They're going to be coming to food and just checking for does. And they're basically to eat, but then they're also checking all those last does. The biggest, it's just like your pre-rut. You just find your congregation of does, and that's where you're going to find bucks, before the rut. And it's the same thing on the backside. Like for me, that like right now is the toughest time, but for us, we just basically just put a bunch of time in there. And a lot of those, people think that, your bucks can be, and they can be 2 miles away or whatever, but you find most of the time, 90% of the time, the bucks will still be getting the does in their prime area. As the buck gets older, like for us, like at 5 years old and 6 years old, they rarely leave an 80-acre piece. So even if you have a small tract of land, if you got a buck that's been there all summer, that's likely going to be his home core area, and he's still going to spend 90% of the time on that, even during the rut, especially if you have does.
Yeah.
Like I just filmed one last night with my buddy Big George was hunting, and he came right underneath us, and we watched him. I hunted there with John the 2 days before, and he was with a doe right there, a little tiny doe, and it was like, right at the beginning of it, when they were just starting to get locked down, he was breeding this little tiny doe. He's like, man, it's like a tiniest doe. And I said, yeah, I mean, sometimes they can come in early as well. But then we went back like 3 days later, like last night, and he had a great big doe, and he was there just tending her. Right, and I filmed him going right under our stand. He's a beast of a buck. He's middle 60s for sure. But it was like, let's just leave him another year.
God.
Anyway, but see, you can see that he had two different does, but he still do in the exact same spot, because that was his home core area. We've seen him there plenty of times, but all those does have their core areas too. So as long as you have a lot of does, they'll basically move from one doe to the next that are still right where they feel comfortable in their home core area.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times when you see those fawns out there, like you get in the peak of the rut, and you're just fawns coming out to your food sources or food plots, and you're like, yeah, there's just fawns out here. The does are there. Those fawns never go too far from their mom. That they're still close by. They're just sitting in the woods someplace. If you watch a buck on a doe, they just stand there and stare at them, and they hardly look at anything else other than if there's some other bucks there, but they're not leaving that far. So many times, like, now we're just putting our stands in the timber, and those big blocks of timber near these food sources. And because that's normally where they are.
Mm-hmm.
They're normally in that timber. And if you can just be lucky enough to get, one of those does, to walk by you in the morning, you'd be in the money. And like this morning, my buddy Tom's first day of the gun season here in Illinois, and there's a buck that we had on early season, but hadn't had a picture of him for over a week now, or 10 days. And then just yesterday morning, I had a picture of him in the morning in this food plot with a doe. And so he went out there, that same spot this morning, even though we didn't, it was 2 days ago. And then yesterday we didn't have any pictures of him again. But I was like, hey, this is the coldest, it's going to be the coldest day of the month, basically. Today's going to be, as cold as it gets. It's going to just be warming up a little bit from here. But I said, this is probably a good chance for that doe goes out to feed in the morning. He'll just be following her. And that's exactly what happened at the exact same time. Literally 2 days ago, 7:30, that buck, I got a picture of him with the doe out on the food plot. And this morning at 7:25, I got the text that he just shot him, like the exact same time, exact same everything. But, sometimes you just get lucky. You just got to find, where those does are, but they're not that far. I mean, most of the time you think, it can be like when I had my farm in Kansas and stuff, there's a lot less deer, and they would travel a long distance along those ditches and creek bottoms. I remember shooting one 8 miles from where I saw him, had a bunch of photos and stuff of him in the summer.
Wow.
But yeah. But like in Iowa and Illinois here, we got lots of deer, lots of does. So those bucks, it's like, even if a doe is hot with another buck, as soon as they're done with one, if they're the king, they just bump them off. So they really don't normally go that far. Maybe at the end of the month is like when you might see them traveling a little farther, when all the does right in their little home core area have all been bred. And also they might start wandering out. You start catching them, out far. There may be a chance to lose them, but they're really not. They're, even though, you don't know. Like I always say, they could be 2 miles away, which they could be, but likely they're still pretty close right there. And if they're not coming out of the field, you just got to get in the timber and spend the day in there. And that's the way we normally kill them in lockdown period, is just getting in their home core area anyway, just getting in the timber and sitting all day. And most of our action this last week, most of the action has been between like 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. So a lot of those times when people are sitting back eating lunch, that's when most of that deer action has been taking place. We're getting pictures of stuff has been middle of the day here the last week.
Okay. So, you answered the question I had, was if you're doing all day sits right now. And I know last week we kind of talked, you're finding those does and you're getting in on that bedding area early in the morning. And then, you kind of talked about how you're sitting there till 1, maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And then you're going to switch stands to an area that might be a little bit closer to food. Are you still kind of doing that same strategy? No,
like right now we're just staying in the timber for the whole day, because they're not coming out most of the time. Even the bucks don't want them out in the fields with them, but the does don't either. they've just been tired of being chased, and they get someplace like in the timber, someplace that, they got a buck guarding them, and they're just, okay, it's the one time, okay, I don't have to run. I don't have 20 little bucks chasing me all over the place. We got one buck that's moving everything off, and you just watch them doing that. And the place that I filmed the big one yesterday is a little bit different because there's a pond there and all the timber, but then we have this little strip of, it was in CRP grass, and then it's timber again, and then it goes out to a big bean field. So we just took that little piece of CRP out, and it's in wheat and clover now. It's gonna be clover for next year. But see, there we could see him behind the pond right away as soon as we got up in the stand, and then boom, he came right up to the pond. They drank there and came up, and that doe would go feed in that little clover field, and he just followed her right up there. And he did the other day too. He followed up and bred that little doe right in the little clover field. And last night he had a great big doe. They came up and ate that a little bit, and just went right back down into the woods there. So I think they'll still come and eat someplace, but they just don't want to get out in the bigger fields where there's lots of deer that can find them and see them, and they just don't want any competition.
Okay.
So, but yeah, we're mostly just in the timber like all day, and that's where we're seeing most of them.
All right. So your advice for the listeners out there going out to the stand this weekend then is get in that timber and find the doe, or find the does and then get in timber, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, if you know where your does are, bedding, and like for us, we have some bigger food plots, and just be the timber in between food plots. Like early on, like we have a big chunk of timber where my buddy Tom shot the buck this morning, and we have a big food plot cornfield right there that he shot it on. And then you just go to the other side of that block of timber. The block of timber is probably maybe a 30, 40 acre chunk of timber.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have a big brassica field. It's like a little brassica field and some other bigger ones. But you get these bucks on both sides of them. So you know that that's basically the timber that they're spending most of the time in. And there's tons of does and stuff, using that timber too. But those are the pieces of timber that we get in there and just, get a stand in the middle, and you really don't care about which way the wind is. There's always going to be a downwind side. But so you just hope for those kind of calm, high pressure days where your scent's just going straight up without a ton of wind. But we always put them up on like in the timber on the tops of the ridges. So, if they're coming, their scent would be going over the top of them when they're down the bottom of the ridge, when they start getting close to you as they're coming up. But yeah, just sitting there all day, and it's been so much fun. I mean, I've been actually, since I shot mine, like my first or second day here, and my buddy John Hoyer, who's a pro fisherman, is down here. I've been sitting with him, and so we've been grunting bucks in, rattling bucks in all day long. I mean, we're seeing 10 to 12 different bucks.
Jeez.
every sit. And unfortunately for him, we haven't had any of the mature ones.
Mm-hmm.
But we're seeing does coming through with bucks that, we think now they're a little too young, might be 4-year-olds or whatever, but running. But he's just having a ball because last year just got him into bow hunting. Last year he shot his first doe and his first buck last year. Brought him out elk hunting. He shot his first elk this year. So he's just like a kid in a candy store sitting out there. He had never seen any rattling or grunting or any of that. So these deer are just putting on a show for him. Getting to see him breeding does, grunting and chasing and stuff. So we just had a ball. But you could sit there all day long. I mean, we've been out there basically almost all day and just action all day. I mean, you might have 40-minute, hour lulls here and there, and you might get to an hour and a half. You haven't seen anything, crack the antlers together, and bang, he'll come. Some little bucks come running in, and then does come in to check it. And now those does, other bucks would be on. I mean, we just kind of get the whole thing scrambled up again.
God.
So we've had a ball.
Man, that sounds like a blast. Well, man, any parting advice? I know we're running out of time here. Any final little golden nuggets you want to share with the listeners just in regard to this waning rut phase, if you will?
I'd say, so much of it is we have the weather, we have cold weather, and it's basically to be out there. But also, look at the moon guides and your moon positions. Like same way we do for musky fishing with like my buddy John. I mean, it's crazy when we go out musky fishing on how many follows you'll get all day long. You kind of get to know where those fish are at. And when it gets to the major and the moon phase, basically overhead or underfoot, and then bam, those muskies will hit like on you. The lure hits the water and your third crank, and they're they've smashed it already.
Yeah.
And it's kind of that same way. It's like, that's why I think this last week, most of our action has been midday because that moon is overhead or underfoot, in midday. So it's not like your perfect moon when it ends up like on the early part, like when you would normally think of deer movement, or late. It's in the midday. So that's the least regular movement. But when it's cold and during the rut here, that's why we're seeing so many of them during the day. So really look at the lunar tables, and you can see it. Like for us, when we have so many cameras out, you have about 200 cell cameras out now. You can just see it when it comes. You look around the majors and the minors, that bang, you'll see how the cameras just light up right in that hour before and hour after, and then it kind of shuts off. Like these last few days, when people have said it's been slow, it's like, yeah, look at my cameras. Mornings and evenings have been fairly slow, but the midday, they're way more active than they normally are. And we're seeing the same thing in the woods. It's like we were talking about. It's like, why are we getting up at 4 a.m? We should just go out at 9. We don't hardly see anything until 9 until 2 has been the where we've been seeing the most action. So pay attention to the lunar tables and look when it's overhead and underfoot. And those are the times you want to be out there. You're going to see increased action. So a lot of times you're just used to going out in the mornings and the evenings, and that's the best. There's times during the rut, especially, when you can catch bucks cruising at any time. But if that moon if you're hitting the majors or the minors, like in the middle of the day, you'll still get does and bucks getting up, and they may not be out in the fields and stuff, but they may just get up and feed around on acorns or browse in the timber. But that's one time that you're going to see a lot of action in the middle of the day.
Love it, man. Well, Lee, man, really appreciate you coming on here, talking rut hunting strategies and just talking deer hunting, man. Always enjoy it.
Yeah, me too, Will.
Hey, man, we'll see you next week for the last part of this rut series.
All right, thanks. Talk to you then, buddy.
All right, y'all, there you go. Hopefully y'all will be able to take some of these little nuggets and pick up on something that Lee spoke about today, apply it to what you're doing if you haven't had a big buck yet, or if you're struggling a little bit. But just remember, find the does and get in the timber and get in the stand all day. If you do one of those 3 things, or if you do all 3 of those things, then your chances of killing your target buck or a big buck probably going to be more significant. So thanks again, y'all, for tuning in to the HuntStand podcast on this episode of Field Note Fridays powered by Yamaha. Next week will be the end to our November rut series with Lee. It's Thanksgiving, and so we'll be coming to y'all on Black Friday with a little surprise. I think there's something that y'all are not going to want to miss out on. So again, y'all, thank you for tuning in to the HuntStand podcast, and we'll see you next week.